Chronic illness is interesting because I have what I would describe as dynamic disability. Some days I'm really well, and other days I might be bedbound.
Welcome to Access All Areas Candid Conversations. Today I am here with Michelle, and we are going to have a chat about the things that are working in relation to disability, the things that are not working so well, and the things that we wish that potentially could be different or could be changed. So it's all about building awareness, it's about advocating, and it's about having a lovely chat this afternoon. So with no further ado, I will hand over to Michelle to introduce herself.
Thanks so much, Fiona. So my name's Michelle. I live with 2 chronic illness conditions. And I think this is a really interesting conversation about disability and chronic illness and what that looks like and what's in the hood and what's not in the hood. And the reason I'm interested in this is both personally, but also because I specifically work with women who are living with chronic illness, whether that's endometriosis, MS, fibromyalgia, lots of autoimmune conditions, Crohn's disease, and are trying to navigate their career while living with chronic illness. So this is a really big discussion, both personally for all of us individually, but also with organisations. So I'm so thrilled that you're having me to chat to.
Thank you. And such powerful work that you're doing as well. And I think it is all about building connection and networking. And, you know, sometimes just that shared story makes people feel like they're not doing this alone, which is pretty cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we'll kick into the questions. And my first question for you is, what do you think the best thing about having a disability or chronic illness is? And sometimes that's hard to identify, but there are some good aspects. What do you think they might be?
So I think for me, chronic illness is interesting because I have what I would describe as dynamic disability. Some days I'm really well, and other days I might be bedbound, like I was bedbound for a couple of days on the weekend. And so the best thing for me about the process is learning new language in the chronic illness community to describe things in the dynamic disability way. And the reason for that is it gives me access to a lot more resources, a lot more support, and a new language. The other thing that I think is most powerful in my experience is that living with chronic illness has been a doorway into my deepest personal power. And the reason for that is if I didn't have boundaries before living with chronic illness, I absolutely had to get them. And that's what every woman and every person living with chronic illness, you have to get boundaries, and you will get them en route through the experience, regardless of whether you had them or not before. And I think that's fantastic that I've been able to build my power through the experience of actually my deepest vulnerability.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. And, you know, we are so taught to just say yes, 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 and forgetting what impact that has on our ability to self-care. And I think having that checkpoint is really important.
It's critical for your literal well-being, whether it's mental, emotional, physical, even financial, creatively. Like, you have all of these resources and you get to decide how you share them. And boundaries give you, I think of them as badass boundaries, because that's what you're really going to need when you've got a little bit of vulnerability on board. They're going to take a little bit of extra energy, but they're really important for you to stay connected to your own personal power.
Yep, so true. And I love dynamic disability. It's like, ta-da, I've got a dynamic disability.
It's like I may not look like I don't look sick. That's what I'll get. Or you look so well. It's like, that's great. But currently I've got vertigo and it's like I'm walking on a ship and I could fall at any moment. And dynamic disability is actually something I learned through the disability network in the USA, because I have a lot of networks and contact there. Mm-hmm. And it transformed my experience with myself living with chronic illness.
Yeah, it's really interesting. And we will definitely come back and revisit that whole whole aspect of dynamic disability and hidden and invisible disabilities as part of this conversation as well, because I think it's a really, really good topic to cover. So on the flip side of the best things, I guess we now need to cover, what do you think the worst thing about having a disability or medical condition or chronic illness is?
I think one of the most difficult experiences in it is that we have a story, and I'm going to talk particularly around illness. We have a story in society that you get ill, you may get worse, but you will get better.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't work for chronic illness at all. And the most difficult thing is people trying to jolly you along, to think positively, as if there's some sort of perfect positive mindset that will overcome the experience of the chronic illness you're in. And people may be extremely well-meaning, but the difficulty is actually this story that we have about illness, which has absolutely nothing to do with the reality, because most people will experience, significant illness, even if it's in the last chapter of their life. And bodies are designed, they're biological. They will break down. That's what they do. And so the most difficult thing for me is working with that story, both internally, but also with everybody else's expectations.
Interesting. Yes, if we were all like, we could go to the spare parts shop and just get a new bit and sort of swap it out sometimes.
Yes.
So my third question is, what do you wish that people knew or understood about having a chronic illness? What's the one thing that you find that you just wish that people had a more level of awareness around?
That living with chronic illness has nothing. It is a physical experience of illness. No matter what you look like, you can have an experience that's actually quite extreme. And that it takes tremendous courage, grit, tenacity, and vulnerability to live with this experience. And I think there's a little bit of confusion because people think when you're ill, it's like getting the flu maybe, or you'll get better, or you just don't feel great. But actually, when we're talking about this experience, for me, it's having vertigo 24/7, waking up with it and not being able to walk. It's being poked and prodded for one of my autoimmune conditions with biopsies and taking treatment that literally keeps me alive, that without it, I would progress to organ failure. Now, that emotional, not just physical, but emotional and mental journey takes a tremendous amount of courage, grit, tenacity, and vulnerability. And I wish people saw that and understood that when they interacted with somebody experiencing chronic illness.
So true. Because as you mentioned previously, it's kind of like they think it's a fleeting kind of thing. It's like, you're unwell, but you'll get better and you'll be right. Chin up, off you go.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you've got the flu, that might be the case. Do you know what I mean? Like that works for a 7-day experience. For a 700 or 7,000 day experience, that process is not very helpful.
Yeah.
There are processes which are helpful, and that's the part that's really important to me in my work, is being able to communicate what is helpful rather than spending all our time on what isn't helpful.
And the interesting thing that raises in my mind when we have that conversation of those people that will then have a comparative story of, yeah, I was really sick. I got food poisoning and it was like the most horrible thing ever.
Yeah. Or I got vertigo, or I was dizzy when I got off the roller coaster ride. And really, what they're trying to do, there's two things going on there. They're either trying to make connection with us and say, oh, I understand, or my sister had it, so I understand. They want to be in the club.
Yeah.
Or it's very uncomfortable, the experience that you're having, and therefore they want to distance emotionally from it because they feel the emotional process.
Yeah, absolutely.
Both of those are very human traits. But the reason they want a distance from it is because we have such a rubbish story about illness that the only thing you have to do with illness is get well. If we had a story which accepted it as normal human experience, then we would be having a different relationship with everybody.
Yeah, exactly. So, yeah. And I think, you're right. That courage, that grit, that tenacity, and the vulnerability, you do show it. And it then, I guess, becomes part of your mantra of, this is the way that I live my life. And I'm sure that there's days where that seems like it's doing a great job and it's working really well for you. And then there's other days where you're like, I don't feel like I've got those courage and tenacity and grit.
Who wants courage? The only way to get courage is to be faced with adversity. Most of us would be like, no, skip it. Thanks. I'd rather not have it. Like nobody wants life. Everybody's like, vulnerability, sure, sounds good, but actually I don't really want to feel it because it's vulnerability.
Yeah.
And I think those are some of the skills. I think there's a whole lot of other skills that we can experience, which include flourishing, which include confidence, which include compassion, which include profound wisdom. They are also the skills that come with this experience.
And the other one that I would love to add is kindness.
Yes,
to yourself.
Absolutely.
And yes, to just, this is me, this is who I am, and this is where I'm at, and that's okay.
And there's nothing this world needs more than authenticity.
Absolutely.
And chronic illness will bring you into your authenticity because you don't have the bandwidth for anything else.
So true. And now let's wrap back around to that whole concept of hidden disability or invisible disability. And you briefly mentioned previously that, like, oh, you don't look unwell, or you seem to be better today.
Yeah.
How does that sit with you?
So I really wish that I spent a long time, working and for someone else in a big corporation. And with chronic illness, medical leave was to go off because there were times where I was very incapable and was bedbound for, say, 6 to 9 months. And then I would slowly make my way back to work, like 5 hours a week, spread over 3 days. Because I was in a conversation about illness, the natural thing was for everybody to talk about how well I looked or how you look better today. I wish at that time that I had understood that my experience was dynamic disability and I was actually having an experience of deep and significant disability. And that would have changed the conversation with human resources. It would have changed the conversation with my manager, and it would have changed my internal relationship. Instead of trying to push myself forward and be well or look well, there would have been a process where I could have gone, you know what? This is disability, and I'm suddenly in a whole different lexicon. I'm not saying it's necessarily better, but it would have given me a lot more ground for those conversations than chronic illness trying to get well.
Yeah. Interesting. And I think there's that whole process of, once again, being accepting of yourself and your situation in that, because so many times, and I know for myself, it took a long time to stop trying to fit in and be like everybody else and to meet the norms of what everybody else was expecting me to do. And it's like, I can't live up to match whatever those things are. And so then that brought a whole lot of guilt and shame and just all of those extra emotions that then when you're feeling not great to start off with don't really help.
And they drain your energy. And this is why I talk about the emotional and the mental impact of the experience, because physical is one thing and that can be brutal. And the emotional and mental impact can be even more significant, particularly because you're constantly relating to people, trying to negotiate and trying to navigate. And I think when we understand how to relieve that emotional and mental anxiety, stress, guilt, then all of a sudden we have more energy and we're lighter. We're literally emotionally lighter and we can do more things.
Yeah. So true. Yeah. And I think it's very easy for society to sort of, I think we are in a place where there is a little bit more understanding in relation to things like, obvious physical disabilities. So if you're in a wheelchair or you've got a guide dog, or, there's something else that clearly says I have a disability, then I think society is starting to sort of sway towards being a little more accepting in that terms. But I really do not feel that they've got their head around the whole extra sort of, chronic illness,
Absolutely.
or all of those those extra things that are incorporated into disability, things like neurodiversity and all of those hidden invisible disabilities that, like you don't look disabled, and it's like, well, just because I don't
And
look
therefore
like
I
I'm
don't think that
disabled.
I am.
Yeah.
It would have made so much difference to me. And from a statistics point of view, like, we understand that living with a disability, that career and employment and work is complex and is underrepresented. And there are lots of barriers that are, lots of advocacy is required and lots of shift in the systems required. It's also the case that the Future of Work report out of Melbourne Uni, out of Future Lab, did the survey, and 38% of people working live with a chronic condition.
Yeah.
And so I know from private research for myself, 75% of the people living with chronic illness from the research we did are working.
Yeah.
And that means that it's so hidden for organizations, but it's actually been there for such a long time. Everybody's doing it, and we've been not supporting it, not resourcing it. And that's a huge drain on the human capital, on the creativity, on just the support. And it means managers and employees are having these discussions in the corner, trying to work it out, rather than it being incorporated into a much bigger diversity, inclusion, and equity conversation.
Yeah. Yep. And, that's the hope, I guess, is that we keep on having those conversations and we keep on bringing it to the forefront and educating and building awareness. And, we're all there doing our little bit, and, it's going in the right direction, I feel, but still lots and lots of work to do. And so, conversations like today hopefully are getting the word out there and getting in front of the right people to, even if it's just that little shift to get people to think differently and to start to consider, what is it like on a day-to-day basis, walk in our shoes, have that empathy to imagine what it would be like. And, maybe one day we'll get there.
I also think, though, it's about people seeing themselves and having that representation, and also knowing you will know somebody who's unwell, or you will likely know somebody with a disability. And this conversation is actually about giving space for the allies in that as well to be seen and heard.
Yeah, absolutely. And, for those who are experiencing this that maybe don't necessarily realize that they can identify and get support, I think that's the other thing, is to be, in a psychologically safe environment, to be able to say, well, you can step up and identify, and we will embrace you, we'll look after you. And, at the moment we're far from being in that position, I think. So, that's another place for lots of work to happen.
And the conversation you and I are having is about creating that space. We're creating it between us. We'll each have our own communities that we're working with. And that in itself there are plenty of spaces. It's a little difficult to find them, but I really appreciate chatting to you, because we're creating that through this conversation.
Absolutely. So to wrap up, I'll get you to sort of, give us a little bit of information about where we can find you, what you're doing at the moment, what you're working on, and, give yourself a little bit of a sort of, promo, and we'll go from there.
So you can find me at michelleirving.com.au. You'll find me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and Facebook at Michelle Irving. That's spelled IRVING, official, on all of those places. And what I'm doing now is I'm about to run later in May a 7-week course for women where we take you through the emotional map and the 4 emotional stages of chronic illness and how to navigate them. And in particular, if you're trying to navigate your career while living with chronic illness, you can work with me privately or in a group around navigating career and chronic illness and have some really fantastic resources and support, but also some true mentoring from people like me who've actually navigated it themselves and know how to have those conversations.
Perfect. And hopefully we'll get you some people, and they will be able to share the journey and share with each other along that journey. So thank you so much for your time this afternoon. It's been a pleasure meeting you and having a chat with you. And I will put all of your links into the social media posts as I do them as well. So thank you very much.